Last time we got off just before the section on environmental disruptions of circadian rhythm. So one way that circadian rhythms can get messed up is the winter. This may be relevant to some of you right now. There is a condition called seasonal affective disorder. In psychology, affect means mood. It's not like affect, like something's affecting something. I think the etymology is related, but what it means is mood, having to do with how happy or sad you are. So seasonal affective disorder is a pretty simple condition. I have a cousin who gets this sometimes. When there's less sunlight, you become more sad, right? Light is very important for kind of waking you up, getting your spirits up. And so if there are long nights, that can affect your mood. Easy way to remember it, there's an acronym for it. Pretty easy to remember, so that's what seasonal affective disorder is. Another way in which your circadian rhythm can get messed up is jet lag. So your circadian rhythm develops in response to signals from the environment, so when it tends to become bright or dark during the day. And it takes some time for it to adjust if you move to a new area with a different time zone. So if any of you have traveled far, you've probably experienced this. Although last night I was teaching this material to my AP psychology class, so I teach an online private AP class, and one person told me she never gets jet lag. She visits her family in China, no issue. So apparently there's at least one person out there who does not experience this, but that's another way that circadian rhythms can get messed up. And then finally, one particularly nasty thing is rotating shift work. Very bad for the circadian rhythms. If you have shifts that alternate between daytime and nighttime, very difficult to get used to. I know this from firsthand experience. Now, the book mentions some studies that back this up, but when I worked concrete coating and polishing, the shifts were all over the place as far as time went. I remember one time I had to grind and coat a parking lot for an apartment, and we couldn't do it until night because people were driving in and out of it all the time. So I arrived at the site around 10 p.m. and got home around 8 a.m. and couldn't sleep. I slept like 2 hours. Had to do it again the same day, really. And that was very unpleasant. So if you can avoid rotating shift work, I would strongly recommend it. I remember towards the end of the shift, a buddy and I looked at each other and we started laughing, but not laughing because anything was funny. It was more like verging on mental illness, like early onset mental illness. Like it was kind of like 10% crying. It was like 5 in the morning, neither of us had slept during the day, and we were just grinding concrete. So that was pretty brutal. Yes?
Do you know anything about how night shifts can cause cancer at all?
Night shifts what? Say that again, sir?
Cause cancer?
It would not surprise me if they did, but I don't know of the relevant studies. Although I will say, if you do have anything like this, if you have seasonal affective disorder, for example, the treatment is pretty simple. You get a special light that mimics the light of the sun, and you stare at it for an hour or two. That's literally the treatment, and actually pretty effective. We are simple creatures. Okay, that's all I have to say about that. Next we'll move on to the stages of sleep. I already have this up. So these are the stages. The way it works is, So beta waves are what are going on when you are awake. These are from EEG scans, so you give someone this cap when they're asleep or awake, and you see what the waves look like. And kind of the key thing to notice is how many waves kind of per second there are. So if there's more, don't worry so much about the height, look at how many waves per second there are. Now if you start to fall asleep or start to feel relaxed, you will then have alpha waves. So everyone right now, just close your eyes and just kind of relax, listen to my voice. Congratulations, you now all have had some alpha waves. They start fairly quickly, actually. If you then fall asleep, you enter stage 1, which is the lightest sleep. Stages 1 through 4 correspond to depth. So 4 is the deepest part of sleep. You are the least likely to report a dream if you are woken up during stage 4. You will also be the most angry at whoever woke you up. That's kind of the deepest part of sleep. And REM I'll get to in a second, but just so you get a sense of how this looks. So there are 4 stages, well 5 if you include REM, which I'll talk about in a second, and you go through a set of what are called sleep cycles. So a cycle is 1, 2, 3, 4, and then back up to REM. That's one cycle. And you go through between 4 and 7 cycles in a night, depending how long your cycles are and on how long you sleep for. Oh, and I forgot to say, so this is all testable. I'll actually go through these waves again. So wakefulness, beta waves. Starting to fall asleep, that's alpha waves. Stage 1 is predominated by theta waves. Stage 2 has a few what are called sleep spindles. If you look in the middle, you'll see that kind of sudden burst of extra waves. That's a sleep spindle, that sudden burst of electrical activity. And then stage 3 and 4 contain delta waves, with stage 4 having more of them. You will not be required to visually recognize the waves, but you should know which goes with which. So this picture is available in the PowerPoint notes, and I'm pretty sure it's in the book too. Okay, now let's talk about REM. REM is probably the most interesting part of sleep. REM stands for rapid eye movement sleep. Any high IQ people want to guess what rapid eye movement sleep is named after?
Is your eyes just like darting around like a mouse on crack?
Yes, very artful way of putting it. Yes, they dart around like a mouse on crack. Okay, there you go. Yes, so your eyes bounce around under your eyelids during REM sleep. REM sleep is also sometimes called paradoxical sleep. And it's called paradoxical because the brainwave pattern is most similar to wakefulness. So your brain is kind of the most alert during REM sleep, but your body is the most still, with the exception of the eyes. And the reason is the motor centers of the brain are inhibited, which is good because then you don't act out your dreams. REM has the most dreams of any of the stages. So therefore the brain turns off those motor centers to make sure you don't act out your dreams. Now, sometimes that kind of motor center inhibition doesn't restore to normal right away. How many of you have had the experience of waking up from a dream and being unable to move for a short period of time? There's quite a few of you. So that is called sleep paralysis. It's not a cause for concern. All it is, I mean, it's concerning in the moment. So that can't move. But normally the brain is turning off those motor centers so you don't act out your dreams. You wake up, it forgets to turn it back on for a little bit. So that's what sleep paralysis is caused by. So as the night goes on, and you can see this in the sleep cycles, REM's, oh, sorry, yes?
would like sleepwalking be an example of like your brain not turning off that like motor thing?
No, so we'll talk about that in a second. There's two kinds of sleepwalking. There's what's normally called sleepwalking, and that normally occurs during stage 3 or 4. If someone is acting out their dreams, it has another term. I think it's called REM behavior disorder. We'll get to that in the sleep disorder section. Good question. But as the night goes on, the amount of time spent in REM sleep increases, right? If you look here, right, REM is longer as you get closer to the morning. So that's one thing to know about REM. You also tend to have more REM early in life. So early in life, REM sleep is close to half of the amount of time that you spend asleep. And it tends to go down as you age. REM sleep also goes up after two types of things: stress or recent sleep deprivation. And next time you have a terrible week, pay attention to your dreams. I can think of some bad weeks I've had, and the dreams were especially vivid. If you pay attention, you'll sometimes notice that pattern, and it's not just my anecdotal experience, there are studies that indicate that. And the same is true if you undergo sleep deprivation or in a sleep deficit. Speaking of sleep deprivation, there is a section in the book on the effects of sleep deprivation. They've done several experiments where they bring a bunch of people into the lab. Half of them are forced to not sleep. I mean, they give their consent to do it, but they're woken up if they fall asleep. And one condition does not undergo sleep deprivation. And consistent with what I was saying last class, this negatively affects pretty much everything. They had various measures of cognitive performance, mood, even physical tasks like manual dexterity. And according to the book, the average person in the sleep-deprived condition performed about as well as the person in the bottom 9 or 10% in the sleep condition. So massive effect from sleep deprivation. This is related to the first of two theories as to why we sleep. Might seem kind of strange that we sleep, right? You might think that it would have been more adaptive for us to be active all the time. And the book discusses two different models for why sleep evolved. The restoration model and the circadian model. The book also calls this one the evolutionary model, but I think that's unhelpful. Both of them are perfectly consistent with evolution. I'm just going to call it this. I think it will be more clarifying when you hear what the model actually puts forward. The restoration model postulates that sleep is there to restore your body and brain while you sleep, to recover from the stresses and injuries of the day. This model has been challenged on the grounds that it's not exactly clear, especially in the case of the brain, what exactly is being restored. There is some evidence that sleep is important for memory consolidation. There's evidence that the hippocampus is very active during sleep, so it may be helping to solidify those new memories. And the circadian model says that the function of sleep is to conserve energy. And the reason the book calls it the evolutionary model, I guess, is different animals, given their kind of evolutionary niche, will evolve to sleep in different times in a way that's more suited to their needs. So given that we are visual creatures, the idea would be it's better for us to be conserving energy when it's dark because there's not a lot we can do, at least not as effectively, during the night as we can during the day. So it's better just, all right, let's just turn the lights out, we'll go to sleep for now, conserve energy, and we'll put in the effort to find food and mates during the day when we can see. By the way, speaking of evolution, on Instagram the other day I saw this really funny thing. This is true, so Charles Darwin, publishing numerous studies on the benefits of genetic diversity, having 10 children with your cousin, which is true. So Darwin didn't really see the inconsistency there, but just saw that on Instagram the other day. I have no point to make with that, but it turns out Darwin was not totally consistent. Okay. Any questions about these two explanations of why we sleep? All right, next, and this will get into this person's question, we'll talk about sleep disorders. So different problems that people can develop related to sleep. The first is insomnia. Insomnia is an inability to sleep or difficulty falling asleep. Note, the DSM-5, which we don't talk about in this course much, but this is kind of the standard kind of manual for diagnosing mental disorders, and it's very clear. In order to be diagnosed with insomnia, you have to be unable to sleep despite great efforts to fall asleep. You have to be trying to fall asleep. If you're just playing video games all night, that's not insomnia. So I had a buddy in college who would play video games until 4 in the morning. That's not insomnia. That's just being dumb. So important clarification there. You may have some other mental disorder, but not this one. Another condition, sort of the opposite, is narcolepsy. This is when you will fall asleep suddenly in the middle of the day at random points. Not even necessarily because you're sleepy. You'll just be in the office, lucid, out. So that's a problem. Again, there's another buddy I had. I don't think he technically had this, but he would fall asleep throughout different classes I had with him. I think he was more in the video game bucket. But my other friend and I took great advantage of this. So you always knew he was going to fall asleep when he did this. His hand went in his face went in his hand. You knew it was just a few minutes before he was going to be out. And one time, my other friend and I took his backpack and all his books, all his stuff that was on his desk, and hid it in the back, just so we could see him wake up and panic and try to find his stuff. It was great fun. There are various treatments available for narcolepsy. It's pretty rare, but that's the basics of what you need to know about that. Okay, and then the condition that relates to my answer to this person's question, REM sleep behavior disorder. So this is not technically, at least colloquially you might call this sleepwalking, but in the DSM-5 it's a different condition. Sleepwalking, which I believe is next, occurs during deep, dreamless sleep. But this is acting out your dreams. I don't know anyone who had this, but I know someone who knows someone. My grade 6 teacher, Mr. Chosvold, who affectionately was known as Mr. T, that's what we called him, Mr. T, because Chosvold was too hard to say. He knew someone who had the following experience, and I'll put it politely. He was having a dream, and in the dream, he walked into the washroom and opened the toilet and did the sorts of things you do in the toilet. But that was in the dream. In the real world, he was acting out his dream, and he was not opening the toilet, he was opening his refrigerator. So, I won't say anything more. So if you have this condition, see a doctor. It's not sleepwalking. So this is REM sleep behavior disorder. Yeah, sleepwalking typically occurs during dreamless sleep. This is acting out your dreams, which, as I mentioned earlier, typically happen during REM sleep. Yes.
Is sleepwalking more analogous with like things like lower tier things like talking in your sleep a little bit and stuff?
I don't know if there's an association with talking in your sleep. I'm not sure what the correlation is there. You have to look into the studies. Yeah, I don't know which stage of sleep that occurs. I'm sure there's some paper on that, but interesting. I don't think I sleep talk, but apparently I do sleep walk, which I'll talk about, I guess, next. So sleepwalking is the next section. So as the book says, sleepwalking occurs during slow wave sleep, so stage 3 or 4. So typically it is not acting out dreams. And I know it's snowy out, but try to get up here on time. Although I know there's snow. So I only have I haven't flashed out a few stories of this, but I'll just tell one. I was on a trip to Costa Rica once with people, and I was not aware that I slept walk, but I was sharing a room with 3 guys, and I got up in the middle of the night, turned the light on, turned the fan on, and was just like, yep, this is what I should be doing. And of course, everyone got up and got mad at me and told me to go to bed, which apparently I did. No memory of this. I was informed the next day that I had done this, and I was like, news to me. So apparently I sleepwalk, but I only know it from others. Two conditions that are one of them isn't a condition, but 2 things that are easy to mix up are nightmares and night terrors. These are not the same thing. Nightmares are bad dreams, which is not cause for concern, that's normal. Night terrors, you can think of them as extreme sleepwalking. So they also typically occur during stage 3 and 4 of sleep. But this is, the person will be screaming, crying, they'll appear very scared. Typically children, they tend to grow out of it. And when they wake up, the only people who remember are the parents. The kids have no memory of this. Yes?
Did you say that was the REM sleep or sleepwalking?
This occurs during the same as sleepwalking, so typically stage 3 or 4, kind of deep, dreamless sleep. And rather than explain more, I actually have a video of this. It may be slightly upsetting. You'll see the kids crying a bit. But they go through some possible explanations of it. And it's kind of interesting to see how the phenomenon presents. So we'll watch that, and then come back and move on to dreams. Okay, so that's the end of the sleeping conditions section. We will now move on to dreams. So as I've mentioned a few times, dreams occur most commonly in REM sleep. If you wake up someone at any random point in REM sleep, they will remember a dream around 80% of the time. For stages 1 through 4, around half the time, and less if you go down to stage 3 or 4. Now, why do we dream? Why do our brains cough up these random, absurd stories at all? And there are 4 theories that the book talks about. And the first one is Freud's. So, can I talk about Freud again? Freud's basic idea is that dreams are wish fulfillment. So there are various unconscious desires and memories and emotions that get expressed in dreams. However, even during dreams, there is some degree of repression. So often, the unconscious desires will get expressed symbolically, not directly. This is according to Freud. So one kind of funny example the book gives is, if you dream about a train going through a tunnel, the book says Freud would probably say that means you want to have sex, but you disguise it as, well, you can all figure out what the symbolism is. And then that's common. That's, Freud was obsessed with that sort of thing, so that's often what the symbolism is. Related to this, you should know 2 terms for Freud's theory. The manifest content and the latent content. So these are 2 aspects of a dream. So, if I'm, having a dream, I don't know, let's say I am walking through the woods, I pick up a bunch of flowers, I throw them into a river, and then I wrestle with a bear, and then I turn into a bird and fly up to the top of the mountain, whatever, right? I just made that up. The manifest content is what I just said, like, it's what literally happens in the dream. I picked up the flowers, I wrestled the bear, I flew to a mountain, whatever. The latent content is the hidden symbolic meaning. So, when you wrestled your father, or, see, there you go. When you wrestled, what I was going to say was, when you wrestled the bear, that meant you were thinking about your father. That was great, that was perfect. That was not planned. I had a Freudian slip in my discussion of Freud. So some kind of symbolic hidden meaning like that, that would be the latent content. Okay, so that's Freud. The next one is the activation synthesis theory. And I'm going to add another term. This is a term from chapter 4. It may help you understand this one. So a quick reminder of what this means. A byproduct is a side effect of an adaptation. So one example I gave was the belly button. The belly button has no function. It's not there to gather food or something. It's just a side effect of the umbilical cord, right? The umbilical cord is an adaptation, right? It was selected for by natural selection because it enables the mother to pass on nutrients to the child, which obviously helps you pass on your genes. But as a side effect, you get a belly button, even though it has no function. On the activation synthesis theory, dreams have no function. They're not there to do anything. It's just that the brain can't turn off completely during sleep, because then you'd be dead. So it continues to be kind of have low-level activity, and this kind of coughs up like images and sounds and narrative and whatever, but it's not really doing anything. It's not there to serve any adaptive purpose. By contrast, the problem-solving dream theory, as you could probably guess, says that dreams are there to work through or solve different problems that you are going through in your life. The book mentions a study of couples who are undergoing divorce, and during sleep, they often are working through things related to that. So some evidence that dreams could serve that purpose. I'll just note one piece of anecdotal evidence from myself. So I'm interested in politics, and I believe in trying to prove yourself wrong, trying to check your own biases and beliefs. And there was one issue about which I changed my mind, or at least it was an important step in changing my mind, was a dream. I had a dream that I was having an argument with someone, and the other guy won. And I was like, maybe I should think more about this. So that would be consistent with the problem-solving view. Yep.
Problem solving just explains like things like nightmares, stuff like that.
Could be. I'm sure they would probably say that, yeah, the kinds of things you're afraid of or trying to get ready for, you would dream about. I mean, this isn't my area of expertise, but I suspect they would say something like that. And then the last one is cognitive process dream theories. And these theories emphasize the role of different modules in the brain. So remember from chapter 4, a module is a subsystem of the brain that's devoted to a certain kind of task. So one example is language. Most evolutionary psychologists think that we have a module for language that's specifically devoted to that. We have a module for color vision, they would say, and various other tasks. So you can think of them as kind of subsystems in the brain. And the idea here is dreams activate certain modules and don't activate others, and that's what explains the specific pattern that dreams take. So emotional modules, perceptual modules, and emotional modules, those get activated during dreams. But motor modules and reasoning modules do not. So the book mentions that the DLPFC, which I mentioned last class, you don't need to know this part of the brain, but the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, specific part of the frontal lobes that's involved in like system 2, like kind of careful reasoning and thinking, that is not very active during dreams, which makes sense, right? A bunch of random, meaningless nonsense happens, and you never question it. You're like, yeah, that checks out, because this part of the brain is sort of not very active. And as I already mentioned, unless you have REM sleep behavior disorder, the motor modules are fortunately turned off, so you don't do foolish things. Okay, any questions about the 4 dream theories? All right. That takes us to the end of, let me check I didn't forget a video. No, I didn't forget a video. Okay. So that's the end of the sleep section. So there's 2 sections left in consciousness, and we'll probably finish both today. The second one I have probably the least to say about. And those 2 are drugs and hypnosis. These are 2 things that can induce an altered state of consciousness, a different way of experiencing the world. These are both topics about which I would not consider myself an expert, and as I'll mention later, I ran some of this by someone. So I know someone who works with people who suffer from addiction, so he knows more about this subject. It's always good to run stuff by people who know more than you. But I'll go through kind of the physiological basics. In fact, frankly, I'm sure a lot of you know more about drugs than I do. So I grew up in a very religious family, so drugs were a big no-no. Later I gave up the religious bit, but I still never really saw the appeal of damaging my brain for fun. I thought, hey, my brain works fine, why would I stop that? So in order for drugs to have an effect on cognition or our psychology, they have to pass what's called the blood-brain barrier. The body is very interested in protecting the brain from various pathogens in the environment. So it's very hard for things to affect the functioning of the brain. But some things can slip by the blood-brain barrier, and those are the only kinds of things that can change your psychology directly. And all the drugs that we will talk about have the ability to get by the blood-brain barrier. There are 2 basic ways that drugs can affect the brain. And both of them have to do with the neurotransmitter system. And the 2 ways are being an agonist. Some drugs are what we call agonists, and antagonists. 2 basic ways. Agonists increase the activity of neurotransmitters. Antagonists decrease the activity of neurotransmitters. There are different ways of doing this. So let's say, I'm going to simplify this. We'll say that the neurotransmitters are triangles. So those are like triangle receptors. Obviously, it's not really like that, but keep it simple. So there are different ways for drugs to do these 2 things. So I'll start with agonists. One really direct way to do it is just to cause the axon to make more of the neurotransmitter, right? Pretty simple. Another way is some drugs literally, they mimic the neurotransmitter. So they're not exactly the same, but they are still able to bind to the receptor site and therefore kind of have the same effect. So for example, opiates do this for the endorphin system. They are endorphin mimickers, or whatever the term is. They copy the structure of endorphins and therefore activate the endorphin receptors. Whereas something like amphetamines act on, I believe, the dopamine system. The dopamine and the norepinephrine system by making the axon make more dopamine and norepinephrine. And then a third way, the book has like a nice picture of each of these. A third way is it can stop something called reuptake. So I think the way I put it in chapter 3 is, let's say there's a neurotransmitter and none of the receptors swipe right for them. The axon will say, you failed. We're just going to recycle you. You didn't make it across. Some drugs stop that from happening. They'll say, come on, give them a chance, So that's another way of increasing how much of the neurotransmitter gets across. So I believe I mentioned in chapter 3 that SSRIs, which are antidepressants, do this for the serotonin system. They stop neurons from reabsorbing serotonin, which means that more serotonin gets sent across. And then for antagonists, there are different ways to do it. You can make difficulty or cause difficulty for the axon to get the neurotransmitters across, or some of them just block it. There might be like little circles, so they'll fit in there, but they won't actually activate the receptor. They just stop these from getting in. Antipsychotics work that way. They block the receptors for dopamine, and dopamine is thought to be involved in various psychotic conditions like schizophrenia, for example. Okay, so those are the basic mechanisms. Does this distinction make sense? Any questions about this? Yep.
So the agonist can block what was it?
Reuptake?
Yeah, they can block that. I'm just kind of confused by that.
Yeah, so like I said, the axon will, under normal conditions, reabsorb or reuptake. I don't know how to say it. The noun is reuptake. They will take back some of the neurotransmitters if they don't make it across in time. They'll recycle them for later or whatever. Reuptake inhibitors stop that from happening. They're like, hey, don't take back it. Just let it go across. Let it find a receptor. So then more of the neurotransmitter gets across. Does that help?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. So when you continually use drugs, whatever the drug is, you eventually develop something called tolerance to the drug. This is where you're used to it. You're used to whatever the effect is, and you require more of the drug to achieve the same effect on your brain. This is because the body is always trying to stay balanced, kind of achieve homeostasis. So the body, in response to drug use, will produce various compensatory responses. So for example, if the drug is increasing how much dopamine is getting sent, your body will be like, let's pull it back there. We don't want to just be wasting dopamine all the time. If it's pumping your heart rate up, it'll be like, hey, let's settle down there. Let's turn the heart rate down. Which of course means that you now need more of the drug to get that same high that you first got. Heroin addicts call this chasing the dragon. You take heroin the first time, it's like, whoa, it's amazing. But then the next time, you can't get quite that same high, so you need more of it. And this is, of course, what leads to the addiction cycle, right? You keep trying to take more and more of it, and are not able to hit that same high. And of course, the really scary thing, if you become especially tolerant or dependent on it, if you then go off, you experience very painful withdrawal symptoms. The severity of withdrawal varies depending on the drug. In the case of opiates like heroin, withdrawal is especially bad. Because your body becomes so used to having it all the time, if you go off, those compensatory responses kind of are now quite strong, and it takes you a while to go back to normal. And in fact, you may not go completely back to normal. I'm going to show a video, which is, I think, a very good representation of how this happens. Very simple, but very clear. So we'll watch that and then come back and discuss. Okay, so kind of depressing, but very well made. Now, I ran this video by my buddy because, as I said, this is not my area of expertise. He said there was one thing he thought I should add to the video. Obviously, the video is a little oversimplified, and one thing that he mentioned is that it's often the case that the drug alone is not enough to produce the addiction. Some people use drugs, like in high school, and then don't fall down this cycle. And there are different reasons why some people do and some people don't. Some people, unfortunately, have a genetic predisposition to addiction. You kind of don't know if you do or not until you try, which is, I'm not saying that you should try, but additionally, often people who use drugs or get addicted have kind of a hole in their life that they're trying to fill. And there was a very interesting rat study that provided some evidence for this. It's kind of a cruel, not kind of, it is a cruel study that they did. They hooked up this device to a rat's nucleus accumbens, which is kind of the pleasure center of the brain. So any addictive drug is going to light up the nucleus accumbens. Some do it more directly, like dopamine agonists, for example. Others do it more indirectly, but any drug that induces euphoria or is addictive has some effect on the nucleus accumbens. So they hooked up this thing to the rat's nucleus accumbens and gave it a lever that it could push and would light up the nucleus accumbens. Put the rat in a cage, it's got food and water on one side and the magic lever on the other, and those rats would push that lever until they starved to death. They just would go over and they just couldn't stop pushing it. And so people say, there you go. That's how addiction works. You just push the lever and you get really into it and you ignore your other needs. But then they did an alternate version of the experiment. They had the same lever for the rat, but they gave it a bigger cage, kind of like rat playland. There were lots of other rats in the cage for it to socialize with, fun little tasks to do, and then you tended not to get the same effect. So kind of an interesting finding that it's not quite as simple as drug causes addiction, although in many cases people are kind of at risk for developing an addiction in roughly the manner that that video showed. Any questions about tolerance or addiction? Keeping in mind it's not my area of expertise. But the basics make sense? Okay. One distinction you should know, even though it's, as the book says, it's not a super bright line, is the line between physical dependence and psychological dependence. Roughly the distinction is, these are two different possible causes of addiction. With physical dependence, you are more so taking the drug to avoid the withdrawal. Your body sort of needs it to not be thrown into the painful withdrawal cycle. And if you're deeply physically dependent, you're not even really taking it for the high anymore. You're almost just taking it to avoid the pain of withdrawal. Whereas psychological dependence, you're taking it for the high, right? You're taking it for the pleasurable effects. The book rightly knows this line is not exactly sharp because, of course, psychological, the pleasure you get from a drug is ultimately physical. It has to do with the nucleus accumbens sending dopamine everywhere. But at least roughly speaking, that's the difference. You should have a rough sense of those two. Okay, now we'll get into the details of different kinds of drugs and how they work. Starting with one that I'm sure most of you have tried at some point, which is various depressants. Depressants are drugs that slow the brain down, and by far the most popular one is alcohol. Alcohol actually slows the brain down. It does so by facilitating GABA release. Remember that GABA is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. When it is sent across the synapse, it decreases the chance that the next neuron will send a signal. Some of you are probably thinking, no way, man. When I drink alcohol, I'm not slowed down, man. I'm like uninhibited, I'm confident, man. It can't be right. The reason for that is it slows down the frontal lobes first. So less self-control, less inhibition, which is why you do foolish things. I used to work in a bowling alley. I've had a few kind of bad jobs, and I wasn't there for this, but we had these nights called fun bowls that I was sometimes there for, where groups of people would come in with a liquor license, like have a big party, and get drunk while they did bowling. One night when I was not there, my boss told me about it, two guys thought it would be a good idea to take their clothes off and slide down the lane like penguins. Because those frontal lobes are just gone, right? No self-control. Alcohol also decreases, so it increases GABA, but it decreases glutamate. And glutamate, you may remember, is involved in memory consolidation, right? So the hippocampus, the one thing that Henry Molaison had removed, it sends glutamate everywhere to consolidate memories. This is why sometimes if you drink too much, you don't remember what happened the next day. Other depressants are barbiturates. The spellings and the key terms. Barbiturates. And tranquilizers. So barbiturates are sleeping pills, and various drugs that are used for anxiety conditions fall under the tranquilizer. It's kind of a scary name for it, but this includes benzodiazepines, which some of you may know about. These are, I believe, prescribed way more than they should be. Benzodiazepines. So this includes like clonazepam, diazepam, all the PAMs, those fall under that. And these also act on GABA. They induce kind of a calm, relaxed state. So they're very good for treating anxiety, but they're also extremely addictive. I know some people personally who have been completely effed by these. Very addictive. I think they should be prescribed way less than they are, but they are sometimes used for anxiety conditions. One thing to be careful of if you're taking sleeping pills or benzodiazepines is that they can interact with alcohol. If you take different types of depressants in combination, you can slow the wrong parts of the brain down. You can get these interaction effects. For example, if you slow down the medulla, you die, right? Because it makes your heart beat, which turns out to be very important. So, got to be careful with that. Any questions about depressants? You guys are first-year students. You're probably experts in some of these. Although that's another thing I never really got into. I mean, I've had shots like with friends at clubbing and stuff, but I've actually never been drunk. I don't like the idea of turning my brain off. It's funny actually. One time, this assured me that I was resistant to peer pressure. I was going for a walk by the river with this girl I had a crush on. We were sitting by the river, it was a great thing. And then she offered weed. She's like, hey, you want to try some weed? And I was like, I don't think so. And I thought, if I'm saying no to her, there's no one who's going to talk me into this. So. Okay, the next big category is, and this marker is tired, is stimulants. So, whereas depressants slow the brain down, stimulants speed the brain up. So this would include amphetamines, caffeine. Now you might think, whoa, why are those together? I mean, obviously this is not as dangerous as those, but it does still speed the brain up, so it still falls under the same category. Cocaine and nicotine. So amphetamines are dopamine and norepinephrine agonists. They increase dopamine and norepinephrine, both of which speed you up. A particularly dangerous version of this is crystal methamphetamine. I mean, look, you're all adults. I'm sure I don't have to tell you that that's a pretty messed up drug to take. Very serious long-term consequences. Another one that's less dangerous and actually is being used, well, it still has some risks that I'll talk about, but it's being used right now in some trials for PTSD. MDMA, also known as ecstasy. If taken over the long term, it can seriously disrupt the serotonin system. So unlike normal amphetamines, this one acts a lot on the serotonin system. And if your brain becomes serotonin depleted, that's a serious problem. You have various sexual dysfunction issues, cognitive deficits, and often severe long-term depression. But one thing it's being used for now in some early, very promising trials is PTSD. In order to treat PTSD, you have to kind of walk through the painful or traumatic memories in a safe space with a therapist, and that's very unpleasant. But if you take MDMA alongside therapy, it's significantly more effective. So I don't mean just like taking MDMA like just for fun. That doesn't treat PTSD. But in conjunction with therapy, there's some evidence that it can be effective. Cocaine is also an agonist for cocaine, it's an agonist for dopamine and norepinephrine, but it blocks reuptake. It doesn't do it directly like amphetamines do. It does it via blocking reuptake. Both cocaine and amphetamines can also cause psychosis. Psychosis is kind of where you lose sense of what's real. You may see things that aren't there and various other things. Now it's a little confusing because these drugs are not primarily hallucinogens. That's another category where that's like their main job basically, is to make you see a bunch of shit that's not there. But one possible side effect of serious cocaine or amphetamine use is they can induce psychosis. The book has a discussion of that as well. Okay. Oh, yeah.
In the test, how detailed do you have to know the effects of each drug?
Yeah, good question. I would say know which neurotransmitters they act on. You don't have to know which one's like blocking reuptake or this or that. And probably more importantly, just know which category each of them is in. I may ask one question about like which neurotransmitter, but more likely it's going to be about, is this a depressant or a hallucinogen or whatever. But which one blocks reuptake versus, that's just kind of for your information. I'm not going to be that picky on the test. Okay, any other questions about stimulants or the drug stuff? There's still two more types, but yes?
Where can cigarettes
So nicotine is also a stimulant. It's obviously not as extreme. Some people subjectively experience it as kind of a calming sensation, but technically speaking, I think it's an agonist for acetylcholine, which, by the way, nicotine does improve your memory because acetylcholine is involved in memory. It's not worth dying of lung cancer, but you know. So I'm not advertising nicotine. It killed my grandma, so be careful.
Not making me think otherwise.
The what, sorry?
The dying of lung cancer for better memory.
Hey, you know what? Life is a choice. You know, sometimes you have trade-offs, right? I wouldn't recommend that trade-off, but any other questions about the stimulants? Next is opiates. These have been in the news a lot in the last few years. So opiates, some books will group them under depressants because technically they do also slow the brain down. But the main thing that they're known for, they're all chemically very similar, and they all act on the endorphin system, the pain-killing system. So they induce kind of a calm, slowed down, pain-free bliss. That's what they do. However, they are extremely addictive. So you probably know many of the names. So on one end of the spectrum would be like morphine, which is sometimes used that's used more in a medical context. Heroin, and these are all chemically similar. You can think of morphine as like diet heroin. That's basically what it is. Heroin, and then the extreme end we have fentanyl, which I'm sure many of you have heard of, which you can think of as super heroin. You only need a tiny bit to get a pretty big high. All of them extremely addictive, but to varying degrees. They also indirectly increase dopamine activity, which is why they induce that pleasurable euphoria. And others extremely addictive. That video I showed, especially accurate for these. I knew a family, good family, like normal family, and one of the kids in high school just tried heroin, wound up on the downtown east side. The parents tried to keep him in, but he would just compulsively steal everything to try to get money to buy more heroin. So very debilitating addiction can be caused by these. I'm sure I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but the book does have a discussion of that as well. Although I should note that after a few years, he did wind up getting over it after going to jail several times and all sorts of other crazy stuff. Not even for using the drugs, but just for stealing. He was constantly stealing to get more money to buy more drugs. But eventually he did get better, yes.
Is opium an opiate?
Opium is what they're all derived from. Yeah, so opium is derived from poppy, the poppy seed, and then these are all derived from it in various ways. I don't know if this is still true, but at one point in time, Afghanistan made something like 90% of the world's heroin. I don't know if that's true anymore, but in dry, warm climates, it's easier. I saw your hand. Oh, same question? Okay. Any other questions about opiates? Okay. Next, hallucinogens. Hallucinogens are drugs that alter your sensory experience. Seeing, hearing, either seeing or hearing things in a weird way, or seeing or hearing things that are not there. Right? Inducing hallucinations. Obviously it's derived from the word hallucinations. So, the classic ones here would be like LSD, magic mushrooms, or psilocybin is the chemical psychoactive chemical in magic mushrooms. There's some others the book mentions. Those are the big ones, though. I remember very well having a conversation at work once. We had a temp come in, so this is when I was at a warehouse. I worked at the Sears warehouse, and I quit actually just a few weeks before they went out of business. Obviously, Sears couldn't make it without me. That's it. But we would have companies send us like temporary workers, like for the day. And you know, when working at a warehouse is pretty boring, so you usually talk with your coworkers to make the time go by. And one of the temps, we started talking about religion for some reason. And I was like, oh, you know, I don't really believe in God, you know, no evidence or whatever. And he was like, no, man, yeah, I don't believe in God either, but I do believe in beings. And I was like, beings, what do you mean? It's like, you see, I took a lot of acid, and I saw these beings, and they're real. I can't argue with that, right? So anyways, that's hallucinogens. I made them as, oh yeah.
Can you explain the difference between this and psychosis?
Good, so that's one possible source of confusion. So think of this as specifying the primary function of the drug, or the primary effect. So hallucinogens, you almost can't take acid, LSD, or mushrooms without having some kind of weird psychotic or altered sensory experience. With regard to stimulant-induced psychosis, they're still stimulants because their primary function or effect is increasing the speed of the brain, and they sometimes produce psychosis as a side effect. Yeah. Yeah, good question. Yeah.
Do you know why different than the other types of drugs, like mushrooms, are not addictive?
Yeah, there's a physical reason for it. I forget the details, but basically it doesn't produce tolerance. So yes, this person correctly notes hallucinogens do come with risks, but physical addiction is not one of them. These tend to not be addictive. You don't have to like keep taking more and more to get the same effect. Again, not to say it's risk-free. I mean, this is one that my mom like kind of beat into me to not beat literally, but like, you know, tried to scare me out of, because there is mental illness in my family, and if you have a genetic risk for various mental illnesses, certain hallucinogens can increase your risk. Yes.
But how does in the notes it said like marijuana, how does that fit into like hallucinogen?
So that's a good question. So, and did I list it as a?
Yeah.
Interesting. So the book doesn't. So marijuana is the next one. This book does not list marijuana as a hallucinogen. Some do. But if they do, they'll list it as like a mild one. Marijuana, I don't know from firsthand experience, but apparently does alter your sensory experience. Like the colors will seem more vivid, the sounds will sound more vivid. I see some nodding. I'll try to forget who I saw. I mean, it's legal, so it doesn't matter. I've got to admit, and I know it's because I'm old, but so I support drug decriminalization, but it definitely is weird to me when I'm walking down the street and there's like a marijuana store. I'm like, huh. It's just very strange to me. But anyways, I forgot where I was. So yeah, so marijuana is a mild hallucinogen. The book doesn't list it as such though, so I won't test you on that. We'll go with the book. I feel like I was going to say something else. Drugs, hallucinogens. So the next is marijuana or cannabis. This is the last drug. So the book lists it as its own category, though as I just finished saying, some list it as a mild hallucinogen. There are two psychoactive compounds in marijuana, THC and CBD. Again, I'm sure many of you know more about these than I do. THC is a little bit paradoxical. It apparently has some inhibitory and some excitatory effects, so kind of difficult to classify. Another reason maybe to put marijuana on its own. And then CBD is even more poorly understood. I'll just note, you know, some people argue for that. They're like, oh, the marijuana is good, bro, because it's all natural. Yes, it's got to be good for you. And I'll just remind you of the naturalistic fallacy, right? Just because something is natural does not mean it's good. You know, arsenic, completely natural, but I do not recommend ingesting large amounts of it. It also does carry some risk of psychosis, especially if you take it when you're young and if you have a genetic risk for it. There's growing evidence for that. And yes, despite what the potheads will, or despite what people will sometimes say, I didn't say that. Tobacco or marijuana smoke still can cause lung cancer, is what the book says, so there still is that risk as well. And look, I mean, I don't want to like completely trash everything. I mean, look, like there are some benefits to these drugs in limited contexts. You know, even a lot of the stuff I'm saying applies to ordinary drugs too. In fact, I think there was one year in the United States, I don't know if it's still true, but there was a year where more people died from legal drugs than illegal drugs. So that everything has risks. Important to kind of make an informed decision about any of them. Like I said, benzodiazepines, those are perfectly legal, and I think they're the work of the devil. So, but anyways. But that is all I have to say about the drugs section. Which means we now will move on to hypnosis, which we may not have time to totally finish. Although maybe, because I don't have too much to say about hypnosis. This is probably the part I know the very least about. My AP Psychology book that I teach from has literally nothing about this. So the basic idea behind hypnosis is a hypnotist will get you to relax, to close your eyes, focus on your breathing, get you into kind of an altered state, and will get you into a state where you are highly suggestible. Suggestible meaning you are very easy to influence, easy to guide you to do certain things or react in certain ways. When people respond to the influence after being hypnotized, the book says that it is subjectively experienced as being involuntary, but it can't be completely involuntary in the sense that you have to be susceptible and willing to do it at the beginning. And people vary in their degree of susceptibility. As the book says, there are various susceptibility scales, with some people being almost completely non-hypnotizable and some people being very easy to hypnotize. Now, if you're like me and you're kind of a skeptical person, this should kind of smell like bullshit, which it does to me. But I have to note that there is good evidence for at least some things that this can be, that it can produce real effects. For example, in the case of pain, there was a very good meta-analysis. Where remember, a meta-analysis means you combine kind of all the studies in a given area and see what the average effect size is. And in the case of using hypnosis for pain relief, they combined 85 studies comparing hypnosis to placebo, so just getting a fake pill, and it was significantly better than placebo. So based on the kind of standards of evidence, you have to conclude that it can produce real effects. And rather than say more, I'm actually just going to show a video, so we won't quite finish. During the next class, I'll talk about 2 theories of hypnosis, and that will finish the chapter. But we'll watch a video about hypnosis for pain relief. So don't pack up while the video is playing, because it makes it harder to hear. But we'll watch this, and that will basically take us to the end. Okay, reminder, APA assignment due tonight.